Have you ever felt the pressure of stalled discipleship in your church? It's probably a silly question. I think we all have felt that. Come on, you've poured hours into planning Bible studies and launching small groups and writing sermons and organizing events. You have worked hard. Your team has worked hard. Your volunteers have worked hard. You've prayed hard. But you look at the people in your congregation and you quietly wonder, why aren't they growing more? Or why aren't they growing at all? Why do we feel stuck? Listen, I know that pressure. I carried it for a very long time too. It feels heavy, and here's why, right? As pastors, we care deeply about seeing people move forward in faith. We don't want anyone to get stuck or stalled where they are. But sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, discipleship just doesn't work. And that's where the pressure really kicks into overdrive. Because if people aren't growing, we begin to assume it's our fault. We feel like we should be able to figure this out. We wonder if, and this is hard, but maybe we're failing as a leader, as a pastor. I'd like to offer you some relief today. That pressure that you're carrying, you don't have to hold it anymore, at least the same way. Because here's the reality. You can't force discipleship growth. I know you know that, but sometimes it's probably good to hear it out loud. You can't force anyone to grow spiritually. I like to think about this like gardening, which is odd because I am a terrible gardener. I am terrible at growing anything outside with green leaves but I understand conceptually at least how this works, okay? I like to think of it like gardening. If I go outside and I plant a seed and then stand over the seed and yell at it to grow, nothing's going to happen, right? If I grab a little, tiny sprout that's coming up and I tug on it upward, I'm not helping it. I'm actually going to kill it, right? And the reason is that growth happens in its own way, at its own pace. This is what great gardeners all understand. They understand this important kind of fact that while you can't force growth, what can you do? You can create conditions for it. You can prepare the soil, for instance. You can water consistently. You can make sure that the plant has enough sunlight. You can remove the weeds that may choke it out. Great gardeners, listen, they don't focus on forcing growth. They focus on cultivating the environment where growth becomes, and I love this, basically inevitable. And you know what? That is exactly what discipleship is like. Too many churches, and I work with churches, all over the world. And when I look at their discipleship pathway, I see this all the time. Too many churches, they kind of treat discipleship like a factory, almost like a factory line. You move people in, you run them through a couple of programs, and poop, out pops a mature Christian, right? Well, we know that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because discipleship isn't mechanical. It's a lot closer to agricultural. Paul, you've heard this, you know this, but he, in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, he's addressing an argument that the Corinthian Christians are having about who they follow. But he says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but it is God that's been making it grow. It is so important for us to remember, because growth is God's job. Our job is cultivation, where God's job is transformation. Let's talk about how that actually works for a minute. Let me walk you through kind of these 4 stages of growth that every disciple goes through, using a lot of what I've learned, and mostly from my failed attempts at gardening. We're going to put it into a gardening analogy, okay? Now, quick note, I have talked about these 4 stages in other episodes and on my website, blog articles. You have probably heard me talk about the number line of faith. Everywhere, every person on the planet is somewhere between, -10 and +10. And, if -10 is Satan and +10 is Jesus and 0 is kind of conversion of whatever we would say, we're all somewhere in between. Now, I would like to think that individually as a believer, I can go as far back as -10 and begin to move people closer to +10, at least directionally moving that way. As a church, though, right, we're probably not interacting with a lot of -9s, -8s. It really is about -3 where we begin to interact with people corporately, right, in our church setting, whether it's a program or even out of the church, out of the building thing that we're sponsoring. Not a lot of -8s showing up, but maybe -3s because now they're beginning to be curious. They're skeptical, but they're maybe intrigued a little bit. So we're going to call those people. Here's the 4 stages. Those first group, we're going to go -3 to 0, right? Those kind of curious people as seekers. They're like seeds. It's the seed stage. And really what we want to do is create soil for that seeker. So agriculturally, right? Every plant starts with a seed, right? We know that. But seeds, they don't just grow anywhere. They don't sprout on a kitchen counter, right? They don't take very good root in the parking lot. There's some great biblical content around this, right? We won't go through it now, but you know it. So what a seed needs is healthy soil that is soft and ready to receive them. For discipleship, this is where the seeker begins. They are curious, maybe, as I said, a little skeptical. They're watching, they're listening, but here's the big question. Does your church create soil soft enough for them to explore faith without feeling the pressure? I mean, think about it. If the environment feels judgmental, confusing, unsafe, hateful, us versus them, right? That seed is going to bounce right off that surface that you're cultivating. But if the soil, if it's soft and rich with relationships, with grace, with clarity, then seekers almost naturally begin to take root. At this stage, right, a seeker really needs, as a seed, a few very specific conditions. Let me just give you a couple. One, they need clarity of entry points. If a newcomer wants to know what's next, can they find it in one or maximum 2 clicks on a website, or one conversation at an info desk, or with a core volunteer or with a staff member? If not, your soil isn't cultivated really well for that seeker, for that seed. Another one, they need safety to explore. Again, a -8 person is not asking faith questions about God. They're angry maybe at God, or maybe they're so driven by atheism or agnosticism that they're not showing up on a Sunday. They're not coming to a small group conversation. We're talking a -3, right? They are curious, but they're still skeptical. They've seen believers and they're curious about what they have that maybe they don't feel they have. So what do they need? They need safety to explore. Questions should be highly welcomed, not shamed, right? Remember Thomas, right? Like Jesus didn't scold Thomas for doubting. He gave him what he needed. Jesus didn't scold John the Baptist for asking, are you really the one, or should we expect someone else? Jesus sent his disciples back to him and said, tell John what you've seen and what you've heard, and reaffirm who I am. So Jesus gives question askers what they need. We have to do the same. We have to create a conducive culture where questions are welcomed, that they're actually welcomed, not just tolerated, but we welcome them. Here's the last one. A seeker that's a seed, they need relationships before they need rules. People don't need a theological exam at this stage. What they really need is a friend who will grab coffee, who will listen, who will empathize, who will show grace. That's what they need. If your church is kind of like a garden, bed, the soil has to be really soft and rich, and it needs to be prepared. That is the only way a seed can take root. Now, stage 1. Stage 2, let's talk about that sprout stage. I call this the student stage. This is from, my number line again, it's from 0 to about +3, okay? What we want to do here is, this sounds weird, but we want to water the student, okay? The seed's been planted. They have now placed their faith in Jesus, but wow, they are just beginning. They are a student of faith at this point. So when that seed kind of cracks open, a little tiny sprout, right, is going to push through the soil, but it is fragile. It is vulnerable. It's alive, right? But it's going to need some help and care if it's going to thrive. this is really where students of faith begin. Like they have said yes to Jesus, or they're right on the edge of that, right? But their roots are still very shallow. I mean, they're not just kind of the world. They've been in the world for so long. I mean, they're just beginning to come out of that to understand what it looks like to follow Jesus. So what do they need? Well, they need consistent nourishment. Jesus told a parable about this, Matthew 13, right? Some sprouts withered because they had no root. The solution wasn't obviously to punish the seeds more, right? It was to create conditions where those roots could grow deeply. So, what does a student need, a student need? Well, a couple things. One, they really need consistent teaching. They need a steady diet of God's word, preached and discussed in community. Like both of those are important. Kind of not hit or miss stuff. It really needs to be dependable for them. And we need to encourage them to depend on it, to participate in it. Speaking of encouragement, that's the second thing that they need. They need encouragement. Really, just as a sprout kind of leans towards the sunlight, right? Students are going to lean towards affirmation. Okay, a student needs to hear, you're not alone, you're not failing, God is at work in you. Like they don't need to be chastised for getting things wrong. They don't need to be guilted. Nobody needs to be guilted or shamed at any stage, but they don't need to feel guilty or ashamed because of maybe a way that they've been living or something that they have done or even something that they just did, right? They need to feel encouraged. We all get it wrong. We're just trying to get it a little bit better next time, and we're trusting Jesus' grace to help. I mentioned this a little bit in the first thing, but they also need rhythms and habits. I need to help them build patterns around things like prayer, scripture reading, showing up in community groups or any version of Christian community. Think about we talked about watering the student. Think about this almost like a watering schedule, right? You can't do this once a month or once a year, right? You can't have a big rainstorm and assume that the plant's going to be fine for a month. I mean, we got to do it on a rhythm. So this sprout stage, it's fragile. But with the right conditions, those roots can grow deep and take root and can create stability, which then leads us to the third stage. We call this the sapling stage or the shaper. And really what we want to do is help shape the shaper. That's what we want to do in this condition, right? This is our +3 and our number line to about a +7, okay? We'll say about that. So when a sprout is growing into a sapling, it really begins to look a lot more like a tree, right? It is sturdier. However, it's not fully mature yet. So if we kind of leave it completely untended, untaken care of, untended, it may still grow, but may grow crooked or it may grow to be weak. This is where, and this is a hard thing to have done, right? But this is where pruning becomes pretty important. In discipleship, this is when believers begin shaping their lives around Christ. That's why we call them shapers. They are owning their faith, but they still need some guidance, accountability. They need challenge. Basically, they need pruning. So a couple of things that specifically a shaper needs as they are in this stage. One, pruning. They need to prune away unhealthy habits. Not in a judgmental way, but in a grace and truth, full of grace and truth way, right? Like, remember, Jesus said, every branch that doesn't bear fruit, he prunes so that it can be even more fruitful. Well, that's what we want to help these people do. We want to help point out unhealthy spaces in their life that are working against maybe what God is working for, spaces where sin may be winning, where it doesn't need to and really shouldn't. We do it through love. We do it through grace, but we also do it with truth. And we encourage, inspire them so that they can begin to prune that away so something more fruitful can take its place. The next thing we want to do in this stage is really dig deep into serving. We want to give these people opportunities to serve in important ministry spaces, right? Growth, spiritual growth really accelerates when people stop consuming, right, and start contributing. Now, we would like to see this across all of the segments, but I mean, come on, a seed who's a seeker is probably not jumping into the deep end of church serving, right? But at this point, as a shaper, serving really begins to shift their faith from theory to practice, especially if they're placed in areas that are a little more challenging, right? I'm not suggesting that you can't put a person in this, shaper category in the parking lot to help park cars on Sunday, but I think they will grow and contribute a lot more in a deeper place than that. And then here's the last thing: they need accountability, not policing, but they do need honest friendships. This is iron sharpening iron. And a person who is beginning to shape their life after Christ needs other people to help hold them accountable to that, because pruning can be painful. Now, if you skip this stage, what you end up with is this half-formed faith. But if you shape it intentionally, you prune it with intentionality, people begin to grow very strong in their faith. It's very steady. They are ready for the storms of life, and they're ready to step into this last stage. This is our +7 to maybe 10 on the number line. And again, when we never get to 10, that's Jesus. As Paul said, we're always in the renewing of our mind. However, the tree stage, the fourth stage, this is really where multiplication happens. And it happens through stewardship of our faith. I call this stage stewards. They are stewarding their faith for the benefit of others in the kingdom. So finally, if you think about the agricultural example, this is where the sapling, right, finally matures into a real tree. It's sturdy. It doesn't just kind of exist for itself. It's providing shade for others. It's providing fruit. It's providing oxygen. It reproduces itself through other seeds. As seeds fall from it, new life begins, right? And by the way, it's stewarded under that. The seed grows in the shade of that great tree. This really is the stewardship stage of discipleship. It's where mature believers begin to bear fruit and multiply. So what does a steward need as a tree? Well, they need empowerment. Don't just give them tasks. Trust these people with responsibility. Let them lead groups, mentor others, disciple the next generation. They also need to have a multiplication mindset, right? So fruit, you should teach this to your stewards. Fruit isn't just for eating, it carries seeds, right? Mature believers should be reproducing themselves in others. That's what the fruit is meant for. It's good to eat, but it is creating more of itself. And they also need continued nourishment, right? A tree isn't just okay to never be nourished now that it's mature. Like even trees need water and sun, right? Don't assume that maturity means finished. Okay, everyone needs teaching, and fresh teaching needs fresh challenges. Everybody needs community, ongoing. Really the ultimate sign of maturity isn't, and you know this, it's not Bible knowledge, it's application and how they're helping other people grow. So let's bring all this together, okay? Kind of wrap up with this. Here's the lesson gardening has taught me about discipleship, okay? And I hope it's helping you to think differently too. You cannot force growth, but you can create the conditions that make growth the natural outcome. Seekers who are seeds, they need soil that's clear and safe and relational. Students, as they're just beginning to sprout, need steady watering and encouragement and rhythm so that their roots can grow deeper. Shapers who are saplings that are beginning to turn into trees, but they're not quite there, they need some pruning, which may be painful. They need serving opportunities. They need accountability. And then our mature stewards who are trees of faith in our church, they need empowerment. They need multiplication. And they also, though, need that continued nourishment. When those conditions are present in each of those stages, growth is basically inevitable. And not overnight, right? And not identically in each person, but over time, it becomes almost inevitable. So let me ask you a question as we kind of wrap up. What conditions are your discipleship environments creating in each of the segments? Are they hard and dry, crowded with weeds, or is the soil fertile? Is it watered? Is it ready for fruit? Your role isn't to pressure anyone forward, right? Your role is to make the next step so clear, so natural, and so life-giving that people can't help but take it. And when these kind of conditions are right, growth always happens.